Welcome to a white, gray, black manga book club discussion of Volume 1 of Nausicaä and the Valley of the Wind by Hayao Miyazaki. My name is Bruce. I am the proprietor of the White, Gray, Black channel, host of the White, Gray, Black weekly manga podcast, and I am joined again by my regular co-host of the Valley of the Podcast, Gautam.
Greetings from the Valley of the Podcast.
Most of you are probably familiar with the movie, not technically by Studio Ghibli, but basically by Studio Ghibli, of the same name and the same director, right? Hayao Miyazaki. But some people might not know that this was a manga first, and a manga that continued after the movie had completed and aired. The movie only covers about 16 chapters or 2 volumes. So what we're going to be talking about today with this little read-along discussion is just the first volume, which if you have if you've got the big book, like I think Gautam, do you also have
I have
the big book here?
The two big books.
Yeah, so if you've got the big book, this is just chapter 1 is what it's called. But this is, I believe chapter 1 is technically 8 chapters compiled. So let's start out. Just for chapter 1, we'll lay a little bit of groundwork. Let's talk about first who Hayao Miyazaki is, what he had done sort of before Nausicaä. I think most people are aware of what he had done kind of starting with Nausicaä and after. His movie work is obviously incredibly well tied to Studio Ghibli, but let's talk about Miyazaki and then talk a little bit about what inspired Miyazaki to write Nausicaä. So first of all, Gautam, are you sort of, tell me about your history with Hayao Miyazaki, I guess.
Oh yeah, sure. Like when I was getting into anime, it was just a whole another medium for me, right? I didn't get into any of this until I was like 13 or 14. So it was kind of fascinating to know that there is a middle ground between children's animations and like adult movies. I feel like Spirited Away is very well suited for an audience of teenagers, right? Because it has the lighthearted nature of a children's movie while also exploring darker themes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that is what initially attracted me to Miyazaki, because before it always felt like you can do one or the other. And here's this perfect middle ground. I feel like when I watch Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Kiki's Delivery Service, I get what I get out of like a Pixar movie or anything like that, a heartwarming story, lovable characters that I can resonate with if I was a child or if I was young. But you also get a lot on the state of the world or themes surrounding like insecurity, adversity, growing up. So yeah, I feel like it captures both elements super well, and that's what got me into Miyazaki movies. I think they're all freaking beautiful.
I think we'll be talking about that a lot, because I do think something that one of the reasons Miyazaki's movies and his art in general is popular is that it feels very Disney, but it isn't sort of shiny and clean like Disney is, where it's like, you know, Beauty and the Beast, or you know, even the scary parts in something like The Little Mermaid, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, a boat crashes on the rocks. It feels very kind of clean. Nobody dies in the shipwreck, or if they do, we don't see them. Whereas in Miyazaki stuff, it's sort of like you see those things. You'll even see, I think later on when we talk in chapter 1, that there's some pretty like brutal and vicious stuff that happens in here, but at the same time, it kind of still has that whimsical Disney like feel.
There are children deaths, and like they were
like a couple of them.
Dark.
There's like a lot actually in this chapter 1. So
they were all dark too, like because of how they were drawn. It wasn't like gory or anything, but like I don't know. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Though.
We'll talk about it when we get to it. Yeah. So a little bit about the author Hayao Miyazaki. Japanese, obviously, he was born in 1941, so he's an older guy, but he grew up. Being born in 1941 means he grew up in post-war Japan. I think you see some of that influence in a lot of his art. He is an animator, most well known as a filmmaker, and of course he is a manga artist because he created what we're reading, Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. Co-founder of Studio Ghibli. He's very much the auteur, director, animator. He's the the brain power and the hand power and the art power behind Studio Ghibli, right? Virtually everything they do comes from the mind and the will of Hayao Miyazaki. So, international acclaim, yeah. This just straight from the wiki. It says, he's attained international acclaim as a masterful storyteller and creator of Japanese animated feature films, and he's widely regarded as one of the most accomplished filmmakers in the history of animation. And I would say that's probably true. I don't think there's
100%.
there's not really many other people in animation where you can say like, oh, who's your top 3 animation directors? And it's like, well, I mean, maybe someone like me who might know a little bit more, I might say like, oh, Brad Bird or someone like that. But Hayao Miyazaki is kind of like almost everyone can name him. And if I say Miyazaki, you go, oh yeah, you can name me one of his films, right? Castle in the Sky, Princess Mononoke, all of that stuff, right? So,
and just for context on how prolific he is, right? He got people. This is back when animation wasn't as big as it was today, like not nearly. He got big name stars to do dubbing for his movies. Like it wasn't Christian Bale.
Yeah. Christian Bale is Howl in Howl's Moving Castle. Yeah.
And Billy Crystal was Calcifer. Like those are crazy names.
I would definitely credit Miyazaki with bringing animation in front of a lot of people who thought that animation was just for kids. And I think this ties into what you were saying about how he sort of has it's like Disney, but it's more grown up. There's brutal deaths and stuff. He definitely shows that it's like things can be whimsical and fun and magical and still be real and grounded. I believe he won Best Animated Picture for Spirited Away in, I want to say the year 2000, maybe 2001 is when he won the Academy Award there. But his history comes from being an animator. He worked for Toei Animation, Nippon Animation, Tokyo Movie Shinsha, TMS is what that's abbreviated as. The latter of which, the TMS, is who he directed his feature film debut, which he directed Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro. No, Cagliostro. I'm going to say that right. That's a weird one. That was in 1979. So about 3 years before publishing Nausicaä, he directed that Lupin III movie. I've heard a lot about that Lupin III movie. I think probably
we should check it out, man. Lupin's just a fun IP, so I bet that'll be a fucking hoot.
Yeah, and from what I understand, his fingerprints and animation style is all over that movie. So I'm definitely curious to check it out. I've only seen a couple of his movies. I've seen most of the big ones, but I have not seen Nausicaä. We might do that as part of this. I haven't seen Nausicaä. I haven't seen My Neighbor Totoro. Any of those. I've seen Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle.
Ponyo? I should say that before we get into this, is I have seen Nausicaä about a decade ago, and I don't remember anything aside from a handful of scenes. So this is ultimately very fresh for me too.
Yeah, well, and like we were saying, the movie only covers the part that we read today, and then the next episode, right? Chapter 2, Part 2, the next 8 chapters, total of 16 chapters. That's what the movie covers, and then the manga goes on for another 5 parts. There's seven parts. I think it's a total of like 50 something chapters. But, anyways, after he directed Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, the parent company of TMS, of Tokyo Movie Shinsha, publishing firm Tokuma Shoten, he talked to them and he agreed to create a manga series for them, for their monthly magazine Animage, initially on the condition that it would not be adapted into a film. They said, hey, you're a pretty well-respected creator animator. Do you want to do a manga for us? And he said, sure, but don't get to make it into a movie. He obviously changed his mind on that after a couple of years. I believe Nausicaä came out in 1984 or 85. So only 2 or 3 years after he started publishing the manga. But guys, we had a little bit more of the story here too, right?
It was a little bit of that's true. So the magazine didn't want to create the film. The magazine itself didn't want it; it just wanted a manga. But Miyazaki wanted the film. Okay. Luckily, the popularity of the manga change their minds because money talks.
Absolutely,
But
yeah. And from what I understand, Nausicaä was a pretty resounding successful movie when it first came out, even so.
Yeah, understandably so.
Cool. So that's just a little bit about Hayao Miyazaki. Highly encourage you to go check out his movies. If you haven't seen his movies and you're here, what are you doing? Pause it. Go watch. In my opinion, his best movie is Princess Mononoke. A lot of people say Spirited Away.
I would say Spirited Away.
Yeah, see, those two are kind of definitely the top
Both are
two.
great though. Watch either. I say start with Mononoke though.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a lot of stuff in Mononoke and Nausicaä are the same. There's a lot of the same themes in both series. We'll talk about that in a bit. Speaking sort of on theming and Nausicaä, there's some cool inspirations that Miyazaki has talked about in some interviews and things about what Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind is based on. One of them is there is an old Japanese Heian period tale. Heian period is like 15 something or 14 something, so a really old one, called The Lady Who Loved Insects. And I have not read it, but I read a little description of it. It's essentially like a weird girl, and she really likes insects, and everyone's like, you're weird, you're never going to get married. And that actual tale, I think, reveals in the end that like she's actually really ugly and weird, and so it's not like she's a beautiful girl. It's kind of, I think,
what was the point of it?
It's a little bit of a play on the classic story would be, oh, she's got a weird thing, but she's beautiful and gorgeous and a good person. And this one was more like, nope, lady who loved insects, she's just weird, leave her alone.
This just sounds like a bad story.
Yeah, it's a little weird. But as we can see even in the part one, insects are obviously going to play a huge part here. They're part of the natural forces in Nausicaä that are, Nausicaä talks to them with some kind of mental link thing and all that jazz. Also based a little bit on Homer's Odyssey. So the Nausicaä name is actually a Greek name. She's a character that appears in Homer's Odyssey. Her name means burner of ships, which when I looked that up after I had read this part one, I think that's pretty appropriate because she clearly, there's lots of dogfighting and ship fighting, and clearly I think Nausicaä is meant to be I guess like a rebellion type character against the Tauromekia people. That's where I'm assuming this is going after reading part one.
In my interpretation, that it's a representation of ships being representing war. So her burning ships is not so much her being a good dogfighter, but more so her ending conflict.
There you go. Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking.
I could totally see that. Yeah. The other big thing, and this is probably maybe the most important influence, is I believe it's in the late 60s. There was an incident in Japan called the Minamata Bay mercury pollution incident. I don't know if it's incident necessarily, but essentially this is pretty standard 50s, 60s corpo poisoning event, right? Oh, we have bad stuff that we're producing as a byproduct. We're just going to dump it in the water, dump it into nature. Who cares? This happened all over the world, Japan, America, Britain, everywhere. Most places have slowly come around on sort of, you can't just dump mercury into the water. But what happened in Minamata Bay was basically a massive amount of mercury and methyl mercury were dumped into the bay. It got to the fish and other seafood things, which Japanese eat a ton of. The locals then ate those fish, ate that seafood. And something like 10,000 people were affected by what they called Minamoto disease, which is essentially mercury poisoning. And this is kind of, I don't want to say this is normal by any means, but this is pretty standard for that time period, 50s, 60s, kind of massive boom. So Miyazaki would have been born 1941, right? So he would have been in his 20s when the Minamata Bay incident was happening. So, and I think clearly that hugely influenced him. We can already see in the story from what I'm reading about, clearly nature and poisoning of nature is the theme of the story, if nothing else, right? If there was nothing else going on, clearly this is a story about nature and humans and their relationship with pollution, right?
Right. That's one of the biggest ones for sure.
And then the last thing, which you'll see, which Miyazaki has mentioned, is the art style of an artist named Mobius, who you should recognize that name. Let me actually Mobius. I'll pull up just the Google search of Mobius art, and you'll see kind of how this is the art style that sort of influenced Miyazaki to the world of Nausicaä and this thing. And you'll see, I mean, like this is that.
Yeah.
This picture here could almost be taken straight out of Nausicaä. This one could too. Mobius known for being sort of very, very colorful, very both nature tech kind of interacting type stuff. Really interesting artist. Go look up more of that. I can see sort of Mobius fingerprints, Mobius inspirations all over Nausicaä. So let's actually just talk about it. Let's talk about it emotionally, I guess. How, when you were reading part 1 of Nausicaä, what were your first feelings? What were your first the big things that stood out to you? Any things you just want to point out?
Yeah. So I guess I have themes that I wanted to talk about, but I could talk about this later. After we do the synopsis, because it'll make more sense then. But I just thought, like, first, I love the fucking aesthetic. Like, clearly a lot of thought went into Nausicaa's design and the design of like the outfits and gears, gear and tech and all of that. It's like very cool. I think the coolest one for me is the glider. I love the glider's design, where you can ride it from the top, but also ride it like from the bottom.
From
like,
the bottom, yeah.
Yeah, hanging from the bottom like Link in Breath of the Wild, right? It does both, and I haven't seen that top glider before, where she just has kind of a little cushion to lay her torso on, and she can shoot her gun while gliding. So I don't know, that was just very cool to me.
Yeah. Let's start with, did you like part 1? Did you enjoy
it?
Did you think it was good?
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I thought it was a really strong start. I think it established the characters really well, and had a lot of cool action set pieces. It was always moving, but somehow incredibly dense at the same time. So
yeah, we were talking just before of how both of us were like, oh yeah, 8 chapters of manga, whatever, 130 pages, sure, we'll get through it quick. But we both sort of started reading it, and we're like, this is like dense. This is a lot. This took more time to read than I thought, but I was not disappointed by the amount that is sort of crammed into every page here. So
yeah, I was saying, like, I expected this to take like 30, 40 minutes, and it took an hour and 20 minutes, and I didn't even realize an hour and 20 minutes had elapsed. Like, it was that good. It kept me hooked. What did you think, Bruce?
This is, as a preface, this is my first interaction with Nausicaä, right? I have not seen the movie. I did not read this full first. I think I read the first maybe 2 or 3 chapters, but not the first sort of volume like we're doing today, a couple of months ago. And I liked it, but I was reading it on my phone and it was really small. I do think having this big book and having these nice sort of big pages to look at actually really helped in sort of reading and digesting, because reading it on my small screen I did not enjoy it as much as I did reading the physical copy here. So this is a really nice copy. I liked it a lot. I did not expect to sort of get a like very feminist forward story. I was expecting the kind of nature stuff. I was aware enough about what Nausicaä was about, but this is like, there's like a girl versus girl fight. Nausicaä is like, she's great. Like, super good. I think Miyazaki historically chooses female leads and does excellent with them. I have no complaints about the way they're treated. He even, maybe talk about this a little bit later, but he even, both Nausicaä and then the bad princess, bad princess Kashana, right? They both sort of like deal with sexism in their own way and are kind of fighting against it and living in it, which is super interesting, but it doesn't remove their power from the story at all. But yeah, I really like this. I had a hard time not just like reading on if we weren't going to record this podcast, or I'm really interested now to see the movie, because I think I would really like the movie, maybe even more than the manga version of these first 2 parts.
Yeah, maybe I think so far I would probably agree because the movie's just so goddamn beautiful
Yeah.
to look at. Um, I completely agree with the girl power point you mentioned. I think this is Miyazaki does an incredible job at writing Nausicaa as a character because he proves her to be incredibly competent without her having to rely on like quote unquote masculine traits. You know, like
right. Yep.
For example, like in Hero Academia, Deku is like the strongest guy, and in order to prove your competency in a manga like that, if you're a girl, you also have to be the strongest girl, right? In Nausicaa, she just has different solutions that aside from being the strongest, right? To solve every problem she might have.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more on that later, but it's just I think it's great.
She's
think
great.
She's so well written.
You're absolutely right that sort of in the character elements that I like to talk about characters, her competency is one of the things that makes her really cool and interesting. And you're right that she's while the other people are, you fight off the bugs or shoot the bugs or whatever, she's like, no, she's like, I'll flashbang them and run away. I will talk to them using my psychic powers or whatever it is that she has.
Her power is literally and figuratively empathy.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just, I feel bad for the bugs. The little lady talk to the bugs. But yeah, so it sounds like we both really enjoyed it. Really good. I think this is going to be a great little series of podcasts here. Let's do a little plot synopsis and then talk about kind of like what we saw. So the series starts, and I'm going to make a comparison here that is not what I'm proud of, but the way that this started, reminded me of Episode 7 of Star Wars. When Rey is in the ship collecting all the parts and stuff, and it's very sort of silent and there's no dialogue. It's just kind of her in the environment doing her thing. That's what this reminded me of. And I don't know, maybe it was influenced in that way, but yeah. So, and again, this is, so the start of the story, we just get Nausicaa sort of in the, what is it called? The Sea of Corruption, the Forest of Corruption, looking for, I don't know if we are sure exactly what she's doing there, but she pretty quickly stumbles across is it an omu? I want to say the American...
It's an omu. It's a husk of an omu that just shed its shell.
Right. I think the American version, they call them the ohm, but yeah, omu is what the translation we have says. But yeah, it's a huge, some kind of bug that has shed its shell, and she's very excited to see this. She's talking about how her, the people at home, her people, whatever it is, they're going to be excited that we have this. She uses, I think, some gunpowder to like burn off one of the little eye things, and talks about using it for an airship, which I thought was really cool. That it's really neat. You talked about the sort of the world building aspect and how like dense it is, and it's amazing to me how much info we get just in like the first couple of pages. You sort of understand, one, that she's in a dangerous place with a huge creature, because we see the thing. We see that she can't breathe it. I think she makes note of that. She talks about where she's from. She talks about other people being excited for sort of like a boon of resources. She talks about the canopy being a part of an airship. So we get like all of these things, and it's in such a simple scene of her just pillaging a corpse of like a big bug, right? And it's like you learn so much about the world, and the world building in here is such a good thing just in this little intro segment.
And I completely agree. And I also love that there's a panel of her just putting the little thing on her head to, one, it shows you the materialist light, like she said. But also, I don't know, it feels like a fun little character human moment, right? But yeah, sorry, I cut you off. Keep going.
No, we're good. So she exits the forest because she gets some ESP thing from, I think we're to assume is one of these omu being attacked or going on the attack, and it doesn't want to, and she kind of gets this thing. Is like, oh no, I need to go. Who is this? Who's calling to me? She sort of exits the forest on her glider, which again, like you mentioned, is really cool. And I know that most of the most of the scenes I've seen from Nausicaa are always like, wow, look how well this glider thing is animated. So I've seen a lot of the glider, but it is very cool. She's got to be, her upper body has to be immense. She's like permanent push up, like flying on this thing while maneuvering it or hanging from it. You say that it doesn't talk about her masculine traits, but IRL, if she was doing that, she would be so incredibly upper body ripped. I just thought that was interesting, but
yeah. She does the planks, man. Her core strength is incredible.
Yep. But she manages, I think, to like flash bomb the Omu, calms it down, and notes that like its eyes change color when it's angry. That comes up, I think, a couple of times in this chapter.
And it's important to note that she flash grenades it instead of trying to fight it, and apologizes for doing so because she doesn't want to even harm the Omu in any way.
She loves the bugs.
She just loves everything.
So after that, she returns, Nausicaa returns home to, her home was just called the Valley of the Wind, from what I understand. Talks to her dad and her people. This is the very kind of Disney part where it's like, oh, everybody loves her. And she brought, little trinkets for everybody. But she meets up with her old mentor, I believe, whose name is, what was it?
Puma?
Yupa.
Yupa.
So she meets up with her old mentor. The old mentor was the one being chased by the bug. That's how that comes to be.
Right.
That's right.
The
one that she flashbanged and saved. Yeah.
Yeah, he got in trouble with the bugs trying to save this little raccoon fox.
Right, which becomes the literal Disney mascot of the story, kind of. So
her familiar, yeah.
Yeah. But so Yupa apparently trained her or knew her when she was younger. They're familiar. Yupa's got all these trinkets, all the kids. We learned that Nausicaa is essentially the princess of the Valley of the Wind because her dad is their leader. I don't think it's actually royal in any way or religious, but this is again where we get some of this cool feminist forward stuff, where clearly it's, a woman, she talks about going to war, and it's like, well, normally the sons go to war, but she says, no, I'm going to do it. Like, dad can't go, so I'm going to go. I'm going to take his place. No one expects Nausicaa to lead.
And dying from the poisoning from the forest.
Right.
And let me just do some scene setting from the prologue. In the prologue,
I totally skipped that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no worries. Effectively, there was a great war. Human civilization was way more advanced in the past. There's a great war that poisoned the entire Earth and destroyed all kingdoms at the time. And this is 1,000 years later, and the world is uninhabitable, covered in miasma that is constantly spreading, called, I think, the Sea of Corruption, is it?
The Sea of Corruption is what it's called now, yeah.
Sea of Corruption, yeah. So it's not a sea, it's just the landmass is corrupt, and the corruption is spreading. So all kingdoms are on the fringes of the continent and are barely scraping by, effectively.
Yeah, and it's actually super interesting. I wasn't expecting you're sort of right in that it's very scene setting, but the story just opens up and is just like, I think we'll probably talk about this a lot, but this is not being subtle with its environmentalist message. It literally starts with saying humankind fucked the world up and poisoned it, and all their stuff exploded and poisoned the earth, and so that's where we are now. That's how the story starts.
Exactly. And effectively, Nausicaa's village, the Valley of the Wind, is obligated by ancient contracts, by ancient paperwork, to join this empire for
Torumekian Empire, which is a cool name.
And they are obligated to do so, and they are a village of 500 people, so they're very small.
Yep.
So they have to, otherwise they get squished by the empire. And sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're absolutely right, and that is actually kind of important, plot important stuff that we need to know. Is that this is kind of a dystopian future of Earth, I would assume, or does it say if it's Earth or not?
I don't know if it's Earth. I don't think.
I think it's not, but it might be. Who knows? So so yeah, after she comes and has this big homecoming, she goes out, I believe she's going to like practice flying, the bigger gunship plane that she has. And she goes out on that plane with her co-pilot, some other old guy. And this is kind of where that was all kind of intro of here's our main character, here's our setting, here's a bunch of world building. And then when she goes out into this plane, this is where the plot starts, right? This is where we get the MacGuffin. Although I'll admit that it felt, I mean, as much as I harp on modern writers and Disney and shit, especially for MacGuffins, this one I actually kind of like the way this one worked. They come across a barge, I think is what it's called, or some a big ship full of a lot of people covered in these bugs above the Sea of Corruption. They try to knock some of them off to get its rudder freed up. They do, but the barge still ends up crashing, and everyone on it dies. And this is what we were talking about, where in a normal Disney movie it would have landed and everyone gets off safely, or there only would have been one person, and though they were hurt, we don't watch them die. But no, in this one it's like it crashes, everyone dies. There's one person who's barely alive, and they give Nausicaä some little orb thing. They give her the MacGuffin, right? And this starts the story. She says, I'm the princess of, I think it's Petage, what was it called? Pejite, or Pejite, I think is what it is.
Oh,
Pejite. She says, I'm the princess. I have this thing. I think she says the Toromechians came to our town, killed all of us. We tried to escape, but we had to fly into the Sea of Corruption, and the bugs got us. You have to take this MacGuffin, this little orb thing, and give it to my brother. The prince of Pejite. So that kind of starts our story. Is we now have learned even more about the world. We've learned, hey, there's other places out there, which we kind of knew. The Toromechians immediately seem like the bad guys here, right? They wiped out this poor girl's place. They drove them into the Sea of Corruption, and pretty soon after this, we see that the Toromechians are clearly the bad guys. So after that, Nausicaä goes back to the Valley of the Wind. We see a cool little how they burn off the spores and stuff, which again is just this cool, well thought out world building stuff. And following this dead princess, following this little orb, following Nausicaä, we meet who I assume is going to be our main antagonist, at least for this first part, who is this Princess Kushana, who is a Toromechian princess, who she commands, what do they call them? Worm handlers, bug handlers.
Worm handlers.
Yeah, worm handlers. These clearly creepy, weird dudes. And everyone's like, oh, ew, worm handlers. Everywhere they show up, they're like, oh, God, worm handlers, blah. This happens 4 times in a couple of pages where
not even the good guys like them. No one's nice to them.
The Toromechians are bug handlers. And the good guys are bug handlers.
Yeah.
But anyways, they follow her back to the Valley of the Wind. They don't clean their ship, which is really bad, and they land in a field, which comes up a little bit later. Nausicaä goes out to meet them, literally duels them. She's, as much as maybe she isn't sort of a typically masculine, emboldened female lead, she still is very kind of
we'll talk about the duel later.
Headstrong.
This is my favorite. This is my favorite scene in the first chapter. But yeah, go on about the duel. That is such a cool scene.
Yeah, but so, she literally walks out there with her sword, plants in the ground, is like, the fuck you doing here? Get off our land. You messed up a field. What are you doing? You brought worm handlers. We hate those guys. Those guys suck.
Yeah, get these fucking worm handlers out of here.
Fucking worm handlers, man. And they're there's a lot of politics stuff about we aren't breaking some ancient agreements. You are. What are you doing here? And they, I don't know if they necessarily goad her into the duel, or she was pretty ready for it, but she duels. She duels one of these Toromechian guys, I think, or maybe it's the person dies, I think, when she's done with him, right?
Yeah.
But through this kind of duel and this goading and this confrontation, which is essentially a prompting for war between both states, as we're led to assume. Her Yupa comes, right? Her sort of old mentor comes in and stops both of them by stopping her sword with his wrist, just being like, nope, you stabbed me, and like grabbing the other guy's axe or something. Literally throws himself in the middle of the fight. We get more cool stuff about Yupa. We learn that the Tormekians know who he is. They're like, hey, isn't that Yupa, like the greatest swordsman in the land? And they're like, yes, it is. And he's like, stop this. You're going to start a war. You don't want to start a war. Something's messed up, blah, blah, blah. Essentially all of this confrontation sort of drives, prompts the Princess Kushana to essentially say, okay, you're right, we're leaving. And she kind of knows. She's like, that little bitch Nausicaä is going to be a problem.
And the Tormekians showed up at the Valley of the Wind to find the doodad that Nausicaä has. They are
the MacGuffin, the little orb thing, which we still don't really know what that is at the end of part 1 here. But a cool little character moment for Kushana that we get, what I really liked at the end of this scene is she's like, oh, I see that you've got a ceramic blade, Nausicaä. That's very cool. Can I see it? Wink, wink. And Nausicaa's like, yeah, sure. And she just fucking like cuts in half and is like, fuck you, and leaves. She literally just like takes her sword, is like, oh, that's cute, cuts it in half, gets on her ship and leaves. And as they're leaving, she's like, yep, they've got it. We're going to come back. Or like, we're going to fuck with them now.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool to show kind of like a cool confidence of Kushana and be a bad guy.
Nausicaa's rebuttal to, it's like, maybe we'll see each other again, is what Kushana says. And Nausicaa's like, maybe we'll see each other on the battlefield. Meaning, maybe I'll fucking kill you next time.
Nausicaä is fucking rambunctious at this point in the story.
Yeah.
I do like, to sort of sum up kind of this little part, I do like that all of this happens and we're talking about like, oh yeah, it's badass, she fights, it's cool. Like pretty much all of this is set up later in the story to be like, you fucked up, Nausicaä. That was all bad. And she is very sad about like losing herself to aggression. Yeah, she compares herself to the Omu who was aggressive earlier of like, I didn't like doing that. I felt bad. I do not want to be this sort of aggressor type person. Which is really interesting also because in most stories, this would be seen as the heroic, protector of the land, driving off the bad invaders. But it's contextualized in the story very negatively, right?
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. It's just the violence-based competency that Nausicaä does have is shown as not great. It's like not a good thing to fly off the handle and kill someone, right?
I mean, it isn't necessarily that she's good with a sword that's bad, but it's the fact that she was eager or willing enough to sort of go out, confront the bad people, get in a fight with them that would not have ended if Yupa wasn't there to stop it.
And she had no control of herself. She was in the moment and heated,
So after all this happens, more cool world building where we learn about the spores are on the ship, the spores from the Sea of Corruption. They have to like burn the field that they were using to grow food for the thing. They have to burn this tree down, which Nausicaä kind of is. A lot of this stuff we see, Nausicaä is essentially the leader of this group, right? Even though her dad is the king or the lord or whoever, she is. Everyone listens to what she says. She barks a command and people listen. She's very sort of commanding and present, which I think is really cool.
By all means, the reins have been handed down to her.
Pretty much already in everything but name, yeah. So they burn the fields. We get a couple of interesting scenes with sort of setting the stage for Kushana. And what's going on with her? She's, a Tormekian princess. She thinks that her brothers are probably plotting against her. Her and her kind of right-hand man, whose name I don't remember. Mustache twirling bad dude, kind of.
Yeah, the right-hand man was assigned to her by the emperor to keep tabs and to ensure that she doesn't succeed, right? Effectively, yes. And they both. She is very well aware of that. It's just she does not like him very much at all.
Yeah, and it's another, and this scene specifically, I think, was another really cool, maybe not cool is the wrong word, really interesting representation of sort of sexism, sort of feminism, where it's like the princess is, again, obviously her brothers are considered better than her. She's clearly competent, knows what she's doing, but she has this little dude watching her who's a guy from her dad. There's like all these kind of male antagonists to this female kind of power. And even though she's shown to be I won't necessarily say evil, but she's shown to be I think she's going to be the antagonist of this first part, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes a lot of sense for her to be the antagonist. But again, she's kind of met with a lot of the same sexism that Nausicaä has already met with, even though they are different people in different cultures. And it's really cool to see because this is published in 1982, right? Like this is kind of maybe late actual kind of feminist thought development in higher education was happening at this time. I'm trying to remember my gender studies class that I took, 14 years ago in college. But I want to say it was like late 70s was kind of the time where this was getting more mainstream. But it's cool to see Hayao Miyazaki literally just girl versus girl. That's what the story is. All the boys are going to be incompetent or stupid, or they're a drag on the female leads who are going to have to escape them. So I really like that scene.
Even that incompetent. They just feel human. But Nausicaä is just, she's more competent than I would ever be, even thinking rationally, like in the moment. Like she's just competency is like a super power for her. She just knows what to do, and it doesn't feel ham-fisted. Anyway, sorry. We're
it's really it's
on the short recap here.
Well, the recap I think will be a lot of our discussion, but yeah. So after we see Kushana and all of her stuff, Nausicaä has been called to war. Right, that's kind of, we talked about that at the start. So she's getting ready to leave. She gets in her gunship. She says her goodbyes. One thing happens before she leaves that is pretty interesting, is Yupa goes to find her and finds that Nausicaä has hidden away in the depths of the Valley of Wind somewhere, been growing normal plants, which, again, more kind of world-building contextualization here. Yupa tells us, like, this is crazy, this is insane. If people saw these plants, they would be so mad. And Nausicaä's like, I know, but look, like, the spores are something else. The spores are bad, but the plants are fine. Like, if the plants didn't have these bad spores on them, we can just grow normal plants. And this is where she also kind of like breaks down and cries and is like, I have to leave this. I can't, I have to let all these plants die. I feel bad for losing my cool earlier. I don't want to go to war, all this stuff with her dad. And yeah, it's just a very sort of emotional moment that I liked a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. So then she leaves on the plane. And we're coming up sort of to the big, I guess, of the first volume here. We're coming up to kind of the big climax, because what happens here is she leaves in her little gunner plane with her co-pilot. They're sort of linked up to a bunch of other guys they're dragging with her. I think that this is other guys from the Valley of the Wind, right? She's like bringing the Valley of the Winds, like 8 dudes, or they don't have that many guys to offer, but she's like bringing the 8 dudes. She's pulling them along with her gunship. She links up with a bunch of these other small towns and their flying ships.
All contracted with the Empire to
right. They all have some kind of agreement to go and give their sort of best men to Torimechia to fight. I'll make a prediction here, because again, I don't have any context for this. I haven't read ahead. I haven't seen the movie. Part of what I think Nausicaä will do is, part of this will be Nausicaä banding together all the little people to go against the big guy. That seems classic to me.
Yeah, I think so.
And the sort of the country people taking on the big city empire, I think that also seems classic. I think the country people being on the side of nature against the big empire who's not on the side of nature, this all flows perfectly well together. So this is a neat little, more cool world building sort of, oh, look, all these other little towns are very friendly. They come up, and then they come to be led by a gunship cruiser commanded by the Tormechian princess, Kushana. And she tries to like fuck with them. She's like, oh, we'll just fly right over without our breathers on for the sea, and we'll make all of them do their take their breathers off. And it's this weird kind of like, I don't even know, like chest beating sort of like, oh, game of chicken, where they're like, oh, we're high enough, but will they feel safe enough, to face the danger of the sea of corruption without their masks, without their rebreathers? And it is at this moment that there are, I think, 3 Tormechian cruisers here. One of the Tormechian cruisers gets fucking annihilated by this little gunship, which this is where stuff starts getting like really intense. Cause this little flying ship that comes just like smashes through one of the cruisers, and you like see bodies like flying out of this cruiser. And this is where shit gets like really intense. Not the Nausicaa's co-pilot is like, oh, slow down, we need to dodge the bodies. And she's like, we can't. If we slow down, we can't tow the cruiser behind us, and just fucking plows through these bodies coming out of this first cruiser. That I thought was probably the most intense part of chapter 1. What did you think?
Yeah, and following right after that, you see bodies of children like grasping each other while falling to their deaths. Because the Tormekians brought in like cadets, which are just children, like
kid trainees, assumedly.
Like
yeah.
10-year-olds.
And Nausicaä calls it out. It's like, I can't believe they brought cadets. Like, how stupid do you have to be?
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is another one of those like kind of the difference with Disney, I guess you could kind of say, of, you know, in a Disney movie, oh, some kids fly out, like they're probably saved. Maybe all the other people die, but the kids are saved. And this one, it's like, no, they just fall to their deaths, and Nausicaa's just like, can't do anything. Like, I have to keep my people safe. Can't do anything about it.
And
sorry,
they
it
all
sucks.
know how much it sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone points out it's like, this really does suck, but it also just happens.
Yeah.
So we learn pretty soon after that the commander of this ship is the prince who the little bauble was promised to, right? This is Prince Asbel, who is the he's like the twin brother of the dying princess who gave Nausicaa the little bauble, sort of at the beginning of the story here. So there's a bunch of dogfighting happens. I think a bunch of stuff happens with Nausicaa and her ship. They have to make a crash landing. The Prince Asbel and his ship, I think, also go down. The Tormekians are not completely inept here. They are able to sort of whip around to get some shots on him. He goes down.
He only actually goes down because of Nausicaa. She is pleading with him to stop killing people. And
that's right. She does her little ESP thing to like, stop.
And he hears that, and while distracted, they shoot the prince's ship down.
Fucking Nausicaa. It's messing everything up. But yeah, so Nausicaa and her ship and Prince Asbel and the guys that Nausicaa was towing, they all go down into the Sea of Corruption, which is very bad. As they all note, this is very not good. But Nausicaa sees the prince go down. She's, of course, gonna save him. This is pretty typical. This is another really cool kind of sequence here where she's like, hey, you didn't ditch my glider, did you? Because I told you to like ditch stuff earlier to try to keep flying. And they're like, no. And they give her little glider. She
I'd like
glides
to mention
down.
the part before that. So when they land in the Sea of Corruption, they land in a lake. And in that lake, there are like 4 Omu that rise up. And
it's an Omu nest, they say, right?
Omu nest, yeah. And they're all like, we're fucked. Nausicaa's like, hold up. Let me try talking to them. The Nomu put their tendrils on Nausicaa, surround her, and they have a conversation which the audience, us, cannot hear. And they leave peacefully. Then all the Omu quickly surge back up with their eyes red this time. Not angry at Nausicaa and the crew, but it's something else. And gunfire is heard in the distance, and you see a little panel of the prince just mowing down some random little buggos, angering the
gunning
forest.
bugs down.
Yeah, and that's where we get to the glider part, where Nausicaa is planning to glide away over to them. Go ahead.
Yeah, good call. So Nausicaa flies over. She finds the prince while she's on the glider. He's still shooting him. She's like, stop shooting. He's like, huh, what? And she just fucking is like, stop shooting. Like kicks the gun out of his hand, and it's like, stop it. And he's like, what the hell did you do? I need that gun. Essentially, like gets the prince on the glider. They go like deep down into the Sea of Corruption, like under these plants and stuff, and they find sort of a clear area, right? And they find under the Sea of Corruption, the trees and all this stuff, a clear area made of sort of this sand, which was actually talked about earlier that we might have skipped over, but Yupa has a little vial of this sand, and I think we have a little like flashback with him, but he says like, he's like, I went deep into the center of the Sea of Corruption, and what I found was this sand. And Nausicaä also finds this sort of down below when they're going deep, deep into the Sea of Corruption, along with the prince. Her glider, I think, gets damaged a little bit on the way from all these little bugs are chasing them. It's kind of a big chase sequence, this cool high energy climax for part one. But it ends with a cool realization that, okay, Nausicaa now knows that, it is clean down here. The plants or the bugs or something nature is working to clean itself. Is getting rid of the corruption, and there is kind of a refreshed world down here, but also the refreshed world doesn't have the plants and the life that we would need to live here. There's kind of that cool meta realization, and also she and the prince talk about this is something I want to call out that's just great here is there's no idiot plot. There's no I'm not going to tell you what's happening. I'm not going to let on who I am. I'm not going to tell you that I have this little bauble. The prince is just I see you have the bauble. And she's like, yes, literally your sister gave this to me. She told me to give it to you. You can have it. I don't need it back from you. They just they talk about it and the plot moves forward and it's excellent. But it essentially...
I'd like to mention one thing before that happened. So it was a climactic fight, getting chased by bugs, going down there. It all ends. Her glider gets knocked away. And her and the prince get cornered by an omu, which is just a gigantic bug.
That's right. I forgot about this part.
It looks like a roly-poly with spider eyes. And it's gigantic. A million times bigger than them. The tendrils grab both of them and set them down. And the omu uses telepathy to talk to the prince. Nausicaa is knocked out. And says, she asked us not to kill you. The little one asked us not to kill you. So we are not going to kill you. Or her. You killed so many of us, you intruder, but she told us to leave you in peace, so we'll be going. This forest doesn't need our protection anymore, but the forest in the south does, so we'll be moving. Mm-hmm. And then all the bugs fuck off.
Yeah.
And that's when the scene Bruce just talked about.
Yeah, they wake up, they keep going. Yeah, I totally forgot. That's a really good call out. Because, yeah, these Omu are clearly they respect and deal with Nausicaä a lot. This is the fourth Omu conversation she's had, or maybe in all of this volume one. Yeah. So, that's a good call out because her empathy or the Omu, whatever ESP connection she has there, super important. But yeah, so we get these two talking to each other, and the whole. Is there anything else? Because the whole volume ends with. The prince tries to send Nausicaa away. He says, I'll stay here. Go, take your glider. It's too heavy for us both to get on there. And it ends with both of them strip. She's like, no. Take off all your armor, strip down. We're going to both go up. We're going to make it as light as possible.
I know how to ride the wind better than you, bro. Get on my back.
She says in the afternoon at this time the spores are released and there's a big updraft and we'll ride that again, just kind of showing her competence of I understand this forest, even all its dangers, and they split the rebreather one each so that he's one rebreather won't be enough, and he's we'll go fast, and it just sort of ends with them just kind of rising out of this clean sand into the Sea of Corruption again, and that's where volume one ends.
That was a good recap, Bruce. There's two things that I wanted to talk about in the recap that we skipped over, just briefly. So one thing we skipped over is that the princess, what was her country's called again?
Torumechia.
Yeah, the Torumechian princess's advisor, the little rat-like guy. He goes down to one of the nations they conquered and finds out what the bauble does. Yeah. It is a key to activate this gigantic soldier beast thing. It's like a giant mech.
Yes.
A giant organic mech that is
right, and so
lumber.
At the very start, the very opening thing where it talks about the destruction of old humanity and all the things, it shows a picture of what I'm assuming are these big mechs, destroying everything or being destroyed or something. So, sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's very hard to sum this up because this is an incredibly dense,
it is so
130 pages. There's so much going on here. But yeah, you're right. That's
Yeah,
very.
just
I
wanted to
assume
bring
that's
up
going to
the
be
mech.
very important going forward. That he found these mechs, and that little bauble, we know what it is now. It's some kind of key or part to those
Awakens
mechs.
is what he
Awakens
said.
it. There you go.
And
Yeah.
the mech, he said two relevant things there. The mech, the mechs, plural, destroyed the world in 7 days, and that the
Little biblical
Empire
thing there.
will see a lot of bloodshed. I assume he means internally, fighting over this mech. So it is just it is a weapon of mass destruction, effectively.
Yeah, Tormechia. I mean, this is more kind of good world building. He sees that thing and says, that's a tool for war that we need to have, or else more people will die to get it or something." So yeah.
And he states that there'll be a lot of bloodshed over it too. So that's one thing. And I wanted to mention a flashback when Nausicaa was passed out and the Omu was talking to the prince. Her flashback was she found a baby Omu and wanted to. She tried to hide it as a little baby, as a little kiddo. She found it and she wanted to keep it. She thought it was cute. And the adults, even Master Upa, were all silent. And in these panels, you can see their face. It's like darkened faces. And they took and killed the little guy.
Yeah.
Despite Nausicaa wanting to keep him alive.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think those are the two biggest things that might come around that we skipped over. Maybe they might come back around. But
Good call. I mean, and there's tons more we didn't talk about. Like I said, this is an incredibly dense, a lot of information. I can see how this could be half of a movie because it's like, yeah, a lot happened there. A lot of good stuff. So let's just do a little. That's kind of the plot and what happened. Let's just talk a little bit. We've already talked about Nausicaa pretty deeply. Is there anything else about Nausicaa in this opening volume that you wanted to bring up or talk about? Any of her characteristics or anything she did that was notable?
Yeah, there were just like so yeah, I saved some of my stuff because I didn't know when during the recap to say it because I didn't want to tangent us, so I saved my tangenty stuff for the end.
Sure.
So what we mentioned about like the theme of war and masculinity is very interesting. This universe and our universe's main method of solving conflict is to kill the other party, and her method of problem solving is completely different. Her power is empathy. She understands what sets these bugs off, what sets them right, and uses tools to just diffuse situations. The flashbang at the beginning being a good example. So instead of defaulting to kill your enemies, her way is literally just problem solving. And her superpower being empathy is one, she cares and understands how these creatures feel, but she actually has a psychic connection to all living beings, not just Omu. Like when she gets angry, the little her cat thing, Tito, jumps off her shoulder, along with all the worms that were surrounding her. Like when she loses control, right? During the duel scene.
Yeah, I mean, she's quite. It's an interesting thing you point out that she kind of has this superpower of this kind of empathy, connection with nature, connection with all living things. Because this is maybe the most Disney part of the whole story. Because I mean, this is is it Snow White? Is it Snow White or is it Cinderella? Who's like, oh, she holds out her arms and all the birds land on her, and it's like that's Nausicaa actually in this story, right? If she holds out her arms and all the little bugs land on her and love her, and she can talk, all the deer trust her, all the bugs trust her, all this cool stuff. It's a little bit twisted, right? Because it's bugs instead of like cute little birds and deer, but she's very much kind of just that quote unquote Disney princess with all the animals kind of flooding to her because she loves them and she would never hurt them and blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was a really interesting twist on it.
Instead of like singing, it's like, please don't do mass murder.
Yes, please stop war.
The Valley of the Wind in general cherishes all life, as per their culture, it seems. They mourned that the oldest tree that they had to burn as it's corrupted by a miasma. And they all felt bad about it.
I think Nausicaa generally cried when they had to burn that tree, right? In the story. I think so.
And Nausicaa, I think exactly, and I think Nausicaa, above all any other character, is fully attuned with the life itself. Like, she just understands the feelings, even if not directly communicated, with every living creature. Uh, minus humans, that would be a bit OP, but yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's Nausicaa's an insanely interesting character. I love her already. I mean, she's incredibly well written, incredibly well characterized. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. We've kind of gone over all of her facets and who she is and what she is and where we think that's leading. I like her design too, especially on the cover that I've got up on screen here. She's got this kind of like, again, it's this very Mobius style, like almost like a uniform, but kind of an organic leaf-looking hat, and in this nice blue. She gets her hair cut at one point, which is a very like young person going out on a new adventure type choice to make in a story, right? Like, oh, I'm leaving some kind of old life behind for my new life. She cuts her hair. I thought that was really interesting. Cool. Yeah. Anything else on Nausicaa, the character?
Yeah, so there's this scene where she's test flying the gunship, their country's only gunship, and she thinks to herself like, this gunship is ugly, and I don't. She mentions not liking it, and she says that it cuts through the wind while her beloved glider rides upon it, and I think that's kind of representative of the theme we were talking about, where...
Yep, you said it. I was going to say it if you didn't, but that is quite literally Nausicaa's point of view, the story, where it's going. Yeah. Don't cut through nature. Ride on the waves. Be a part of nature. Ride in it. That's to me that you're absolutely right. That
people, is right. Like don't learn to cohabitate the world with people instead of like cutting them down and killing them. Yeah,
good. Go with the flow, be water. There's a lot of different ideas of this sort of like, don't push back on the world around you. When it pushes you, go with the flow. The same thing with nature. Nature encroaches, don't cut it back, let it be. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I think we'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, but this is not hiding what it is talking about. It is wearing on its sleeve that this is about humans' cohabitation with nature. Like, that's what it's about. And that's just another good sort of thematic example with the gliders there.
And I guess I have one final thought that I wanted to talk about, and that's the duel scene. So the Empire show up at the Valley of the Wind like we talked about, and they were just rude guests. They landed on a field, they didn't give a shit, and they started barking orders. Nausicaa rightfully is pissed, and feels like they're just stepping all over their little country. Loses herself in rage, and one of the soldiers is like, you country scum, like, you dare talk to us that way? And they have a duel. Nausicaa in this duel shows like crazy sword skills, learned from Upa, presumably, and stabs this guy in one panel through the chinks of his armor, like jumping over his axe, and then they continue fighting before Upa stops it, like Bruce mentioned in the recap. She killed that dude in that one strike.
I forgot about that. Yeah, they like drag him off later, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he's dead." Like that fight was about to be over. He dead.
Yeah, and Upa stopping the fight was like, he knew that guy was dead, but it was all political, right? Like, because if that guy died and everyone knew he's just dead, it's like, that's a political conflict between this country and the Empire. And Upa stopping it, even though that guy was dead, and saying, "Okay, both sides stand down," and the princess saying, let's get out of here. It was more so not so that the Valley of the Wind could join them and their military without starting kind of a political conflict between the two countries.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. They just like drag him off at the end, and they're like, "Oh, he died." And Upa later was just like, "Yeah, that guy was dead when I stopped the fight." Like, he died moments later. Very cool. I actually really liked, just in general, like the sort of politics here are very, they're kind of nuanced, but also like easy to understand. The story, I think, just does a good job at telling you like, okay, Tormechia has this big army. They're conquerors. They're pressing against. They have these agreements with the little people, with all the smaller settlements and stuff. It's just really cool and Upa clearly is like he has been to he knows he's worldly, a worldly character, right? He knows about all these things. So he comes in to stop that. Yeah.
And the king actually has a perfect quote that I wrote down to describe what you just said. He said, "The sparrow must live like he is a hawk." Oh, wait, no. The sparrow must live like a hawk if he is to live at all. And the sparrow being a peaceful nation, the hawk being a predatory bird, they have to do what they have to do in order to survive in the first place.
Yeah, this is the idea behind defensive driving.
Yeah.
is you have to assume that everyone on the road is out to kill you if you are to function correctly. You as a sparrow have to know what it's like to think like a hawk so that the hawk doesn't get you.
And more than that, he was also stating that they have to join the war and do the dirty work, even though they don't want to. Otherwise, the hawk will just eat them. You know.
Don't piss the hawk off. Maybe this all boils down to don't piss the hawk off if you're a sparrow.
Don't fuck with Termechia too much, man.
Cool. I think that's good on Nausicaä. I mean, there's going to be way more to say, I think, in the next one. She's clearly the character that we understand the most about. We could talk about her alone for some more. I wanted to bring up something on Princess Kushana, who is the Tormekian princess. Miyazaki and there's another creator, Hideaki Anno. Anno is most well known for Evangelion, and a lot of those kind of his depression is his modus operandi, his MO. Hideaki Anno worked on the Nausicaä film and asked Miyazaki, hey, I'd love to do a manga side story around Kushana and her military exploits, kind of a prequel probably. But Miyazaki said, no, you cannot, because Miyazaki believed that Anno was going to intend to use her to quote unquote play war games. And I wrote here, yes, he would have done this. Miyazaki was right. Because everything I know about Anno is like, absolutely, it would have been suffering and depression and war and death. That is kind of, again, like I said, that's kind of his MO in creation. So he would have done that. Miyazaki was smart to say no.
I wonder though, right? Like, because they gave Anno Godzilla, and that's like an anti-war story. And he did a good job at that. But I feel like Miyazaki's right. Anno probably would have played some fucking war games with when this isn't very much an anti-war story, right? That's funny.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought it was a funny little exploit for any of you anime or manga fans out there like we are. So
I could see that. Well, yeah, those are my thoughts on chapter 1. Did you have any kind of standout moments or anything you really like? What was your favorite, I'd say, scene from that first chapter?
I mean, the part that I think really stood out to me was the whole kind of dogfighting scene towards the end when the Tormekian cruisers get taken down, and I think that just the juxtaposition of how peaceful and good and how Nausicaä wants to see the world and how everything was kind of set up the world that she wants, and then to have just like we're talking about, like kids pouring out of the back of these cruisers, falling to their death, and Nausicaä just being like, "Sorry, can't help them. That sucks. I hate to see it."
Yeah,
but legitimately, you hate to see it, and she kind of goes forward, saves who she can save. I thought that scene was really interesting. I think like her talking to the Omu and the bugs are interesting. I don't know where they're going with what the Omu mean to like move south in the one scene where they're like, oh, we aren't needed here, we're needed somewhere else. I assume the Omu are conscious. I think they mention we passed over this. They mentioned that I think they're like a hive mind, right? They say something like we're many or of one mind or many one mind, something like that.
I think they are a hive mind that can also independently think that they just share their thoughts.
Something like that. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it doesn't explain it fully, but it seemed kind of hive-mindy to me, but because they mentioned they were all going to move together. So I assume that they're moving together is to, like, because they were chasing Upa at the beginning, like maybe they're going to go fight the Tormekians. I'm not sure. So I thought that the whole ending sequence, the last, 30 or 40 pages was just like really cool. Like I'm like super excited to see this on screen and see this animated because was just like high action, high octane, cool flying stuff, interesting kind of decisions. Nausicaa not being a Disney princess and saving falling children, just saying that sucks. I just really like that part. I thought it was really cool. That, and then I think the very beginning, I'm a sucker for a really good start, a really good hook. And I really liked the, like we were talking about, the sort of, the kind of first 2 pages, which are like, oh, all these years ago, humans fucked up. We destroyed the world, pollution everywhere. Now there's a sea of corruption. And then introducing Nausicaa, introducing the world, just so skillfully done in those first couple of pages to give us so much information about the characters, so much information about the world, to make it exciting and high octane too, right off the bat. The story kind of starts, says, here's your main character, here's your world, and then immediately says, in an action set piece, right? And it's Upa getting chased by the Omu and Nausicaa saving him. That's the pacing of this is really good.
It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, I was not expecting this to be such a, like, masterful storytelling. I mean, like, I'll bring it up now, I guess. Really, the only issue I have with this whole volume 1 is that some of the art is a little cluttered, a little hard to read some details. Maybe it's overly detailed or something. Might just be sign of the times. Some of the pages are really full. It's really dense, like we mentioned. I think that's like my only issue with it is like, yeah, it's a little hard to flow. Kind of the action doesn't always flow super well. I can kind of tell what's going on, but it isn't the kind of flowy action that I like that I made a whole video about. But other than that, like, yeah, the storytelling here is excellent. The characterization stuff is super good. I like just about everything about this. The world building is like second to none from what I've seen in a first volume, just about. Like, we spent so much time talking about the world and what's going on, and it's like, yeah, we've read 120 pages. And it's like, I could tell you so much about this world. It's so interesting.
Insanely strong start. I could have told you my first note on like themes of masculinity and war were after I read 20 pages. I was like, okay, yeah, I can see this. The story did that good job of telling it.
Yeah, well, and again, like, I'll reiterate it again. This is not hiding those facts from you. It wears them very publicly. So yeah, if you don't, this is like what high school teachers should use to teach like theme or something like that, right? Like, because it's so obvious, in my opinion. Like, it's just so obvious the theme that it's going for, and that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, not at all.
I think a lot of times when people try to hide or make things not obvious, people miss the point. And I don't think you can read as much of even just this first volume of Nausicaa. I don't think you can read it and miss the point of humans bad, nature good, Nausicaa, connection with nature, sympathy, anti-war, all those kinds of things are very, very public and very, very obvious.
I have one last question, because we've had kind of a productive discussion so far. There's one part that I didn't actually get. I didn't understand really. Why a character did this thing. It's when they were looking at the mecha dude, the giant Titan guy, the right hand man of the princess goes in there with a worm handler, and he pushes the worm handler off a cliff while they're looking at the Titan. And then he looks down the cliff and he's like, huh, he's dead all right. Makes sense that there are a bunch of accidents here. And I'm like, why did you do that? Why did he kill that guy?
One, I fuck the worm handlers, right? They're obviously, they're obviously bad.
Yeah. We hate them too, by the way. Fuck the worm handlers.
Yeah, it does. Good. Glad he died.
Yeah.
That reads to me like, oh, if anyone else knows about this, or if a rumor about this gets out, that's bad for me and maybe bad for the princess, whoever he's serving the emperor. He wants that information to not leave that room, except for he wants to know where it is. That's a selfish, you can't know about this.
Oh, and that was the captain of the worm handlers, so only the captain knew, presumably, right? So
only the two of them were down there, and I think is very much because, like you mentioned, he said, wars are going to be fought over this, people are going to die. So I think he's very much keeping that information close to his chest, either to come back and claim power on his own, or to give it to the emperor or give it to the princess. I don't know what his angle is on that, but I read that as this is very big news, and you can't, if you talk to, I can't even risk you talking to somebody else, and you're a shitty little worm handler, so we're not going to let you do that. So,
and yeah, justified, right? Like, he's a worm handler. he doesn't need to live.
Exactly. Yeah, their lives are worth nothing. We hate them.
Yeah, get eaten by worms on that pit. But okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, we've covered just about everything I think I had on my docket.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Like we were saying, super strong start. I'm really excited to read through more of this. Next episode, Jules Beginning, we'll be doing volume 2. I think after volume 2, I'm going to watch the movie. We'll talk about, maybe we'll do a little movie spoiler discussion just as a comparison to the manga. I might drop that in the middle there. But yeah, I'm actually like really excited to get to volume 2 now, because I don't know how good it's going to be after that, but considering they made these first 2 volumes into the movie, and the movie is so well respected, and this first volume was really, really good, I'm fully expecting the second volume to be sort of even better or just as good. So
yeah, likewise. And when can we expect the next up to come out?
So in 1 week, whenever you're watching this, assume 1 week later, the next episode will be coming out. I don't know exactly when we're going to put this up. We're recording this on Sunday. So this will go up in the middle of the week sometime, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. And then I think a week after that, you will see another episode. So yeah, keep an eye out. This will be once a week publishing. We've got our podcast, which comes out generally Friday night, Saturday morning. And then you should see Nausicaä sometime in the middle of the week. And we'll do that for 7 or 8 weeks and see how it goes.
Yeah, that sounds good. And next episode will likely be shorter because we won't have our fun facts at the beginning. We'll get right into the recap. And
close to the beginning, we've already sort of characterized our main characters. I think it'll be a lot more just kind of going through what we read, how we felt, what's happening. So yeah, exactly. This one's going to be a little bit longer for sure. So,
but cool,
awesome. Hey, everybody, thank you for listening. Thanks for reading along with us. If you're interested, if you want to get your hands on these like really, really wonderful hardback editions from Viz, this is like $55 on Amazon, which is like, I was surprised how cheap this is. This is like...
They're very well made, by the way.
Yeah, it's super well made, and I really do think reading it... I'm a big proponent. I read the majority of the manga on my cell phone, and I'm totally good with it. I do not think it would have done justice if I did not have a big book like this. So, big proponent of that.
It comes with a free poster. So,
comes with a poster. The art inside is great. I didn't get to show, but like the first couple of pages are just this like gorgeous like portrait arts of Nausicaä
and her gear and stuff.
So
yeah.
All of that being said, I'll throw out some who I am, where you can find me. Again, my name is Bruce. White Gray Black podcast channel. I do both of those things. That's curated content and our weekly podcast about manga. You can find me on Twitter at WGB Manga, or on Patreon if you want to give us a little bit of money. We'll always say yes to that. I think it's like $1 minimum a month. So hey, $12, buy us some manga. That's patreon.com/WGB Manga. Yeah, other than that, thanks for being here.
Catch you later.
Have fun reading Volume 2, and don't forget to read more manga.